Alright, this is the sixth video. This is the fifth one that's being assigned as homework in a critical thinking class. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is. I do hope that you are having a good time. In the previous video, I introduced some of the concepts of deductive arguments. In this video, I want to give you a little bit more knowledge about deductive arguments. Moving to next week, we'll look at operators. This week, we are going to learn a little bit more about deductive forms, and I'm going to show you patterns that are bad, patterns that are not going to be valid, patterns that are what we call fallacies, or golbu in Japanese. So let's review. Last time I mentioned there are some words with normal meaning, so we saw contradiction, excluded, disjunction, conjunction, hypothetical, syllogism, and probable. And there are some words like deductive, which means enekiteki. And there are some things we say about arguments being strong or weak. And in the case of deductive arguments, we use valid or invalid. And if a deductive argument has all true premises, then if it is valid, we say it is sound. In contrast to deductive arguments, we will much later in the semester look at inductive arguments. And I want you to keep in mind the definition of a statement and of a dilemma. So, in the first three lectures, we looked at statements. So a statement is something that can be either true or false. And I said that statements are usually, but not always, stated declaratively. So then we have the statement that the ground is purple. This is a statement. On the other hand, if I said to you, what color are your eyes? This is not a statement. That by itself does not have a true or false meaning. Similarly, if I exclaimed, ouch, or there's two types of statements. There's premises and conclusions. The premises are the statements we are saying to support our conclusion, and the conclusion is the thing we are trying to prove. So, I also talked about how when we evaluate and make arguments, we want to do so nicely. We want to convert things to their most logical form. We always want to identify the premise and the conclusion, or all of the premises and the conclusion. In a good argument, the conclusion will either come at the front or at the end. So we have that here. We also want to be concise, be concrete, be consistent, and we want to make our arguments using reasonable justifications. We don't want to use force or emotion to convince people in critical thinking. We also saw three laws from Aristotle. The law of identity. For any item, it always keeps the same meaning. So we live in a world where we think that the desk is still going to be a desk, that the video will keep being the same video, and things of that sort. The law of non-contradiction. We do not allow contradictions, not, left parentheses, a, and not a, right parentheses. So we cannot have at the same time a claim be true and false. Finally, there is the law of the excluded middle. For anything, it must be true or false. So if we have a claim, it must either be A or not A. So this is also called being binary because we only have two choices. So I showed you some standard argument patterns. So this is the first one. This is modus ponens. If P then Q, P, therefore Q. Modus tollens. If P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Disjunctive syllogism. A or B, not A, therefore B. The word disjunction means or, so that's one of your keys. So just look for these patterns. Hypothetical syllogism. If P then Q, if Q then R, therefore if P then R. Dilemma. A or B, if A then C, if B then D, therefore C or D. Dilemma second version, A or B, if A then C, if B then C, therefore C. I want to show you two patterns that are not good argument patterns. Remember, these are patterns that are bad. Please be careful not to use these patterns, not to write these, not to confuse them with the patterns that we just looked at. Okay, the key to understanding two of these patterns is to understand conditionals. So I showed this last time, but this is important and many students have trouble understanding it. I'm going to give another example. If Dr. K is writing philosophy, then Dr. K is in a good mood. The antecedent is if Dr. K is writing philosophy, the consequent, Dr. K is in a good mood. A conditional says that when the antecedent is true, the consequent is true. So this was what we saw in modus ponens. So this actually has three things follow from this. The conditional does not say anything about the consequent when the antecedent is false. So when this left-hand side is false, we don't know whether the right-hand side is true. So if I'm not writing philosophy, you don't know whether I'm in a good mood or not. Second, the conditional does not say anything about the antecedent when the consequent is true. So if I'm in a good mood, this doesn't mean I'm writing philosophy. It could mean a lot of other things. It could mean that I am watching a movie that I enjoy. It could mean that I'm reading a book that I like. It could mean that I'm running. It could mean any of a number of things. Finally, if the consequent is false, we do know that the antecedent is false. So if Dr. K is writing philosophy, Dr. K is in a good mood. If I'm not in a good mood, that means I'm not writing philosophy. On the other hand, if I'm writing philosophy, that means I'm in a good mood. But everything else we don't know. So if I'm in a good mood, that does not mean I'm writing philosophy. And if I'm not writing philosophy, that does not mean that I am not in a good mood. So let's see these patterns in action. So let's look at this argument. If Dr. K is teaching the class, then the class is in English. Dr. K is not teaching, therefore the class is not in English. What do we think? This argument looks similar to modus ponens and modus tollens. How would we symbolize it? If we wrote this in symbols, it would look like this. K implies E, not K, therefore not E. But this is not a good argument form. This is a fallacy. This is a Golbieu. This is the fallacy called denying the antecedent. So the left-hand side, we're saying no to that. But that does not mean the right-hand side is false. There are other people at this campus who teach classes in English. So it does not follow that just because I'm not teaching it, that it is not in English. So this is another pattern to look at. If Japan wins the World Cup, this means they're strong. Japan will not win the World Cup, therefore Japan is not strong. So, again, this is a fallacy. This is not a good pattern. So we need to be careful about the language that we use in English versus deductive arguments, same thing in Japanese. If, then, and, or do not always mean the same things that they do in normal speech. So only if Shane is attending will John also attend. If John attends, then Shane is attending. That's the meaning of that sentence. You can pick between apples and pears, but you can't bring both. Here, and means or in deductive language. So sometimes we have to understand what the native language means or the natural language means to be able to translate it into the sort of logical structure that we want. Let's look at another argument. If Dr. K is teaching the class is in English, the class is in English, therefore Dr. K is teaching the class. What do we think? Again, this looks similar to modus ponens or to modus tollens. How would we symbolize this? The answer is this. We would do if K then E, E, therefore K. What do we think? Well, this is a fallacy. This is affirming the consequent. This is a Golbieu. Do not use this pattern. This pattern does not work. Why? Because just because the class is in English doesn't mean that I am the one teaching it. So here's another example, same problem. If America wins its game, then America will make it out of the group stage. America made it out of the group stage, therefore America won its game. This is not necessarily true. Let me give one more example. If it is the letter B, then it is in the alphabet. Okay? It is in the alphabet, therefore it is the letter B. This is a fallacy. Why is this a fallacy? Because the letter A is also in the alphabet, the letter C is in the alphabet, the letter D is in the alphabet. So it's completely possible that it is in the alphabet, but that it is not the letter B. So let's talk some more about validity in deductive arguments. Normally we want to know if our conclusion is true, but we can also ask a different question, and the question is our argument valid? Valid means an argument follows all of the rules to make it truth-preserving. True means that the statement is actually the case, that if we look in the world we can check and see that it is true, or we can argue that it would be true. An argument being valid does not actually make any statement in the argument true. The conclusion being true also does not make the argument valid. If an argument is valid, follows the deductive rules, then it is truth-preserving. Truth-preserving does not mean the argument's conclusion is true. Instead, truth-preserving means that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Let me repeat that. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. So again, valid and truth-preserving do not mean that things are true. They mean if we start with true premises, we get a true conclusion. So true or false, an argument with all true premises must have a true conclusion. True or false, an argument with all true premises can have a true conclusion. True or false, an argument that is valid must have a true conclusion. It will have a true conclusion when? The answer is when will it have a true conclusion? Is it when all the premises are true at all times? When at least one premise is true? True or false, an argument that is valid and has true premises must have a true conclusion. The answer is just the last one. The only time that we know that the conclusion must be true is if the argument is valid and all the premises are true. So a deductive argument can be valid and have a false conclusion. A deductive argument can be invalid and have a true conclusion. This means the conclusion is true by coincidence. In other words, our argument did not prove the truth of the conclusion. Our argument merely happened and the conclusion happened to be true. A deductive argument cannot be valid, have true premises, and a false conclusion. So if it's valid and it has true premises, the conclusion must be true. So maybe to give an example of something where the deductive argument is not valid, so our structure is bad, but the conclusion is true. Either it is sunny outside, or it is raining outside. Premise 1. Premise 2, oranges are a fruit. All right. Conclusion, Dr. K is from America. So this has all of the parts to make it deductive. It's not valid though. There's no connection between these premises. All the premises are such they have no connection. But the conclusion does happen to be true. So this would be an invalid argument, invalid deductive argument, in fact, that has a true conclusion. An argument that is deductively valid and has all true premises is sound. This means every sound argument is a deductive argument. Every sound argument has all true premises, and if it has one false premise, it cannot be sound. If it is not valid, it cannot be sound. So again, if it is sound, that means that it is valid and has all true premises. So, summary of this week's material. You want to avoid affirming the consequent. You want to avoid denying the antecedent. Don't get confused by English. Understand. Valid means following the rules for deductive argument. True means something is actually the case. Sound means valid with true premises, and valid is not the same as true. Again, valid is also not the same as sound. So true applies to statements, valid applies to arguments. Valid and sound both apply to arguments, but a sound argument is one that is valid but also has all true premises. So thank you for your time and attention. I hope that you're enjoying these videos. Please ask questions if you're not understanding the material. I think this is a very valuable idea to learn and master and a great opportunity to improve your English. Thank you for watching this video.